All right, here we are back into some After Effects work with layers. This time we're going to focus on a layer's transform controls. That is a property attribute that allows us to change position, scale, rotation, opacity, those sort of things. And right now we're just going to look at them, check them out, see how they affect a layer. Then our next step will actually start making movement happen. And these things should be taken in these smaller steps. So pay attention, bear with me, and go along with me. I have the file here that I'm working with available on the link from the website from Box. So go ahead and grab that. You can open it up and go along with me, or try it after you watch this video. I am a big fan of having two screens set up, one with the video that you're watching of me, and then one with your actual project open, or the exercises, so you can kind of tag back and forth between the two. See if you can do that. That'd be awesome. You can set up a phone watching the YouTube video and then have After Effects set up on your computer. That's thinking. All right, picking up where we left off last time. I have 5 layers. I have the background, I have the left and right orange squares, and then I have the 2 center squares, the bigger blue one and the smaller orange one. What I want to do is just address the center orange layer for now and talk about what's inside of my layer options. So if I select my center orange layer, you can see it's selected, right? The little handles and stuff. Now, if for whatever reason you select a layer and you're not seeing handles, this happens once in a while because you hit a key on your keyboard and things all of a sudden changed, right? And that is fixable under View, and it is Show Layer Controls. So the keyboard shortcut to show or hide those things is Shift Command H. Maybe you hit those keys by accident at some point, and then all of a sudden your handles went away, and you're like, wait a minute, they're selected, but I can't see them selected. Oops, I just did a double click. See, that happens all the time. Don't worry about it. Know that you're in control of your machine, not the other way around. So you can go to View. I want to see my layer controls, and just turn them back on. Bam! These are such little things, but they end up driving you absolutely crazy later on, and you forget or whatever, but now it's programmed in your head. Okay, so I'm going to open the little kick out menu arrow thing here that opens up the transform attribute for the layer, which has another little kick down arrow. It's the first time I've ever called it a kick down or kick out menu. I used to have a term for that thing. I just haven't had to say it in a long time. Kick down menu. Pop down menu, drop down menu, sure, whatever. Anyways, under transform, you now see that we have 5 attributes for transform. We have anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. Most of these things will make sense to you just by their name. Position, we know what position is. Scale, absolutely. Rotation, you bet. Opacity, most of us know. Anchor point is a different one. What I want to first talk about is the coordinate system that is part of After Effects arrangement of objects in the space that we've provided here, and it is pretty much on par with every other graphic program that deals anything with art or design, and that is a coordinate system that is based off of a X and Y coordinate system, where 0 for both of them is your top left corner. So I actually have my info panel open right now. You can open yours if you want to, and see while I'm dragging my cursor around, not even clicking on anything, it's showing you where my cursor is, and the closer and closer and closer I get to that corner, you can see that, oh, it's really kind of hard to nail, but 0, 0 is right there. That is 0x, 0y. So if I'm looking at a layer and thinking about things like my anchor point or position, then it's really important to understand coordinates and how they work. So it's going to increase on the x-axis, which is my horizontal axis, and it's going to go from 0 in this case to 1920 on the other side. So if I put my little cursor way over here, 1920, bam, right on that edge. And then for y, which is the vertical axis, is going to go from 0 to 1080 in this composition because it's an HD composition, 1920 by 1080. So keeping those things in mind, that's important. The other thing to keep in mind is that the actual layer itself has a physical dimension. I made this square when I went to layer, new, solid. I made it 400 by 400. So I have an actual physical dimension for this square, 400 pixels wide by 400 pixels tall. So when I look at anchor point and I look at the coordinates for these things, my anchor point is at 200 by 200. That would mean halfway along my horizontal axis at 200 and halfway through my vertical y-axis at 200. That is this tiny little crosshair in the center of my layer. So my anchor point is centered, and it always is centered when you bring in a solid or a layer, so like a graphic file, a logo, or a shape you made in Illustrator, or a photograph that you brought in from Photoshop. The anchor point is always dead center of its dimensional properties. And that's fine, we're just going to leave it right now. We're just going to leave that. We're going to come back to it after we visit position and a few other ones. So now when I go to position, this value is showing me 962.7 by 540. I'm not quite sure why it's 96.7. I feel like it should be, well, okay, we'll find out here in a sec. This is the position of that anchor point per the dimensions of my comp. So it should be centered. 1920, half of that is 860. 860? No. 960. So this should just be 960. I'm going to click on it and hit 960. There we go. That's what I wanted to see. I must have moved it in a earlier tutorial. However, the file, maybe I'll just save it. Okay, there. Now everyone's will be at 960 and yours won't be screwed up because I'm going to upload this now as it is, and you won't have that little quirk. But notice how I had to do a little problem solving. I scratched my head for a second because I'm like, man, I'm pretty sure half of 1920 is not doesn't need a decimal point in there. It should be a nice even number. So 960, half of 1920. Perfect. So this should show you that crosshair, which is the anchor point, is halfway across my 1920 x dimension and halfway down my 1080, which is 540 on my y. So it's dead center in my composition. That is position. So the next one is scale. Scale, since I built this solid and brought it in at 400 by 400, I haven't changed the scale. It's at 100% scale. Fine. Rotation, we have not rotated it. It's perfectly at 0 degrees. And then my opacity is at 100. So all of these can be altered. And that is where we start to gain some interest, but then also like movement once we figure out how to move these, which will be the next one, I think. It should be the next one. So if I start with position, there are two ways that I can, well, there's actually three ways that I can move the position of this square. I can take the square itself in my canvas window and I can grab it and I can start moving it. And as I'm moving it, you should see that those position coordinates are changing. So that is all relative to the anchor point, which is currently in the center of my layer. So if I were to move that anchor point up towards that top corner on the left, I can get really close to a 0, 0, barely. It's really hard to drag it by hand, but that's pretty close. It's 1.2 and 1.3. So that anchor point is nested up in the corner at 0, 0-ish. Or I can go all the way to the other corner, and it should be something around 920 by 1080. So it's pretty close. Pretty darn close. So you can move it and put it somewhere. If you feel like you just gotta, eyeball it and stick it somewhere, then you can do that there. I'm just gonna hit undo and put it back in the center. The other way to move it would be to use the actual coordinates themselves. You can type in a coordinate by clicking on something. So if I hit 0, tab, 0, and then tab again, it moved it absolutely to the 0, 0. So no more eyeballing and kind of like, I kind of got it there. It's like a definitive 0, 0. It's very calculated. This is helpful, absolutely helpful. There will be times when you need to be calculated. So it's good to know you can just click on those things and enter in what you want. You can also drag them. So I'm dragging that value to the right, which means I'm increasing the distance from 0. So I'm, 960? So I'm just going to stop it right there. So there's halfway. Then I can go all the way across. So that's just doing a completely lateral move. So dragging the X value is just going to keep it locked in the Y in a nice, perfectly straight line to somewhere else. That comes in super handy. I'll hit undo and undo again and undo again. Now the same thing for the Y. If I were to increase my Y, that means I'm going to be going further from the top down or closer to the top or beyond it. Right, so I can go beyond. I can go past 0. It goes into the negatives. That's awesome. You should know they can go into the negatives. All right, trick. How do I get rid of this box completely off the screen? I just have to get it 200 and 200 past one of these values. So I could go a negative 200 and then another negative 200, and I am off screen up here. So it's like having an actor off stage and waiting for that actor to come in at the right moment. And this is sort of a routine that you're going to have to get into as you become the choreographer for your work. So if you can think about the coordinate system, it's not that hard to wrap our heads around it. We've been working with coordinates since elementary school. So guess what? It's back. So I could just do the 960 again and a little 540, boop. Now I'm back in the center. So that is another way to move these things. It's a little more controlled, right? So that's 1, 2, 3. So there's another way. You can just use your arrow keys. An arrow key, if you just hit the arrow key, will nudge it 1 pixel at a time so you can see that value go up. If you hold down Shift, it'll do it at 10 pixel increments. That can be handy. And then, that's the other thing. If you were to grab it on the canvas and drag it and hold Shift, it'll make sure that you're not slipping at all on the Y, or on the X, it's not slipping at all, so it keeps it constrained in a nice line. The other thing is, if you hold down Shift while you drag, it is Shift, it'll go at greater increments. See how fast that's going? I'm barely dragging anything. Without Shift, it moves like this, but with Shift, it moves really fast. The other thing is that if you hold Command, it moves it really slow, super slow, and this comes in handy too. I can't tell you how many times I use both of those little shortcuts for jumping in value. It works for scale, it works for rotation, and it works for opacity and anchor point. It's anything with a coordinate or value in this thing. You can either maximize your move or minimize it by holding Shift or Command. Okay, scale. scale is at 100, I can go past 100, fill up my whole screen. I can go down to 0 and then go into the negative, and it sort of inverts itself. So scale should be something that you can easily kind of wrap your head around. However, there is a way to break the uniformity of both X and Y being scaled at the same time, and this is the little link button. If I click off of that and I increase my X, now you can see that it's just stretching. Ooh, look at those squares are not lined up. That's fine, I'll take care of that. So I can stretch my X value, squeeze it so it's really slender. And I can do the same thing for my Y. I can make it really tall or really squishy. Okay, that is breaking the link between your X and your Y, and that comes in very handy often too. Rotation has two values here. Rotation gets a little tricky for people because sometimes you just get anxious and you are excited, whatever, and you just go to that first value. This first value is revolutions. If I change my revolution to like 5, nothing happens. But what it's actually done is it's spun it 5 times 360 basically and puts it right back where it is, but it's hard to tell. If I take that second value and set a value of like 45, now we can see that yes, it has rotated. It's rotated a quarter turn, right? So that's one way to change your rotation. The other way, obviously, is to drag it. So now as I drag it, you can start to see it rotate over time. And so that's really handy. There is a rotate tool, and it's in the toolbar here, and it's going to allow you to take the layer that's selected and just rotate it however you want. And you can see that in my info, it tells me what rotation and degree I'm currently at. I'll just hit undo again. So there is a rotation tool. It's always nice if you use a tool to always go back to your move tool, just because you might click on something and rotate it again and not realize you might have done it by accident. Opacity only has value from 0 to 100. So all these other ones can go up and down to the negatives and whatnot. You can't go into negative opacity. You can't go past 100. It's either fully opaque or completely transparent or somewhere in between. So as I drag that value, you can see it disappear, come back. So you can think about things kind of breathing in transparency over time too. You can also click on it and set it to whatever you want. You can't adjust that on the canvas. There's no tool for it. The only way to adjust opacity is in the transform properties. Okay, now, cool, we've checked all that out. Oh, and notice rotation occurs around the anchor point. And this is really good to note because we're going to go look at the anchor point right now. I'm just going to set that back to 0. So the anchor point is quite important for things like the behavior of rotation or the behavior of your scale. So if I was to change my anchor point, let's just say I took my X value down and I set it at 0, which is right about there. It's right on the edge. That makes sense, right? We're on the edge of the square. We're on the very leftmost edge. We're at 0x for that object. We're not at 0x in the composition per the 1920 by 1080. It's only relative to the layer itself. So if I set that to 0, and I'll just click 0, and then I'm still in the center of my document, that's fine, I'll leave it there. Scale now is going to scale from that anchor point. So no longer is it scaling from the center, it's scaling from that leftmost edge. Important to know. Rotation is now going to rotate per the anchor point, which is now on the edge of that square. So it's no longer doing a center rotation. It's doing something a little more unique based around that edge. Okay, I'm going to hit undo there. Now I'm going to put my anchor point at 0, 0, and that's going to put it at the corner. So if I scale, it's scaling from the corner, undo, and if I rotate, it's rotating from that corner. So you can start to think about ways to in which you're going to interact with your layers and different objects that bring, a different sensation or feel to it. Now that I have my anchor point set at the corner of 0, 0 for my square, I should think about my position. So I could hit 0, 0 for my position, and now instead of it being half on, half off the screen, it's fully on the screen, tucked in nice neatly into that corner. This could be a great way to start an animation or a transition, kind of taking over the whole thing, So that is that relationship between anchor point and then those other attributes. There is a tool for the anchor point. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get this all back into the center again. That looks good. There's a tool, and the tool is this little guy next to the rotate tool, which is the pan behind tool or the anchor point tool. And if I select that, it now lets me grab the anchor point on the screen, on the canvas, and put it somewhere where I want it. And if you see me moving this around, look at the coordinates for anchor point and position. They're both moving. It's moving both the anchor point and the position of my solid layer, which wasn't happening when I was just moving the anchor point by itself or the position by itself. Now that I'm grabbing my little anchor point and putting it somewhere, it is relocating all of this. And if it's over here and I change my scale, you can see it's relative to that point right there. Same with rotation. It's going to rotate around that spot. And that can be really kind of handy as well. I'm going to put that back. So the pan behind tool is going to be something that you use once in a while. We're going to do we're going to build like a skeleton structure and do some character animation work later on. You're going to need that tool to put that anchor point in the right spot per where our body, sort of rotates around things. And it's easier just to move it and put it somewhere from what your eye says, based as opposed to trying to navigate your way somewhere with these other tools. And what's nice is it just moves freely. I'm going to go back to my move tool. So those are the transform properties and attributes for a solid layer. We are going to get into keyframes and actually moving these attributes over time and making movement happen, and our designs are going to start to come to life at this point. Okay, thank you, and we'll see you again on the next one.